Alright guys, so I'm going to be doing a review for another comic that was sent to me by my good friend Chris, aka the Mount Vernon Kid, and this is DC vs. Vampires. Now if you don't know why I don't have the book with me, it's because I already put it in the library and I'm kind of too lazy to go and get it. Shut up. Anyway, so I'm going to be doing my review of DC vs. Vampires Volume 1. This was kind of treated as like the next big... They really did hype this thing up. It was written by James Tynion the Fourth, and it was basically built up after you know how big DCeased got. There was like this announcement for like this and another comic called Task Force Z, which was like Jason Todd leading zombie versions of deceased Batman villains. And yeah, while I haven't read Task Force Z, nor do I care to, DC versus Vampires, I was like, all right, that looks interesting. You know, but the thing of it is that they were just, it really did feel like, and this is nothing on the comic itself, but like, it really did feel like they were trying to recapture DCeased. Like, that's what it really did feel like, was, we're trying to do a recapture of what DCeased brought us, and that what they brought us was money. So, we're trying to, like, recapture that magic, so, and do it again, but this time with zombies and Jason and vampires. Now, James Tynion as a writer, I think, can be good, but also I've read stuff that is just kind of mediocre to bad from him. I do think his horror books are pretty cool, and I'm very excited to see what he's going to do with Dracula in the Titan Books Universal Monster comic. This, however, like, I read it and I was like... So, it's very clear you guys wanted to just make DCeased over again, but, you know, what if DCeased, but there's no hope? Like, that's what it feels like, you know? What Tom Taylor, you know, did with DCeased was make it this very, you know, it sucks, and there's, like, it's DC zombies, essentially, and they are, you know, these violent, animalistic creatures, and there's, like, deaths in there that break your heart. But at the same time, it actually gives you hope, and it makes you feel good by the end of the book. Like now, I haven't read Dead Planet or Hope at the End of the World, and the third book, War of the Undead Gods, which is the solid ending of the series. But like at the same time, I'm like, yeah, what made I read DC Unkillables and the first DCeased and DCeased Unkillables. I meant to say DCeased. And there was like, yeah, it makes you feel hopeful, it makes you care about this universe that is being overrun by the dead. It's actually a cool idea. But the problem with DC versus Vampires is it just feels like a fuck you. Like, it really does feel like a fuck you for, you know, it feels like, and I understand, it's the first volume of this miniseries, and then they made spin-outs out of it, like All Out War and Hunters, and I was like, this is too big. Like, at least DCeased spread out this whole thing rather than make you read like a whole web of comics for this whole book. And here it's like, yeah, we're gonna write this, and Tom Taylor literally had a plan where it's like, I'm gonna write this first, and then I'm gonna write this next, and then this next, and this next, rather than have you read, you know, do a whole fucking event and then make a whole comic that you have to do homework on afterwards. And I know I'm overly comparing it to DCeased. I understand that. I really do. But the fact of the matter is that it's really hard to compare, because that's what DC was trying to do, was make another horror comic that was that they could compare with DCeased. So let's get into the actual story, shall we? We're 4 minutes in. Let's talk about the actual fucking comic. The comic basically is that Michael Bennett, Andrew Bennett, Andrew Bennett, if you don't know who that is, Bennett is from a comic series called I, Vampire, and it makes sense, it's about vampires, and he's trying to warn the Justice League that vampires have infiltrated every group around the world, and it turns out the League is among them, like Green Lantern. So, there are now vampire versions of DC characters throughout, and it's almost like a secret invasion kind of comic where both heroes and villains alike are like, who's a vampire and who's not. And it's such a fuck you to everything you like about DC Comics, and I understand that was the idea, but like, it just feels super mean-spirited, especially if you like really and it feels like and this is the thing I never got with some vampire lore, is that once you get turned, you turn evil. Like, there's no going back kind of evil. But then, like, why are there vampires like, Bennett? Why were there vampires like Bennett when you're just making them all evil? Like, that's the problem. If you're gonna make these vampires like all evil, you gotta commit to all of them being evil. And also, I'm just going to spoil it because the comic's been out for a while. Nightwing is the new Lord of Vampires, and he's the one who's been planning it. And they don't really properly explain why he became the new Lord of Vampires. Maybe they explain it better in the other comics. I didn't bother. It really was a slog to read this because a lot of it was predictable. It was very predictable. The only thing I didn't see coming was Nightwing being the Lord of Vampires. But at the same time, I was like, I should have seen it coming. It really was a slog to get through, and I was like, I really don't want to read this again. I really don't want to read the continuation of this. It's like, yeah, let's make Superman a vampire. Let's do everything that, quite literally, they had done in, like, making, Wonder Woman, Superman undead while killing Batman. It's like taking all the beats but not having the same kind of central story as the other. And again, I am aware that, like, this is only the first half of the book, but at the very fucking least, make me interested to read it, because, like, you do not get, like, you don't get a sense of, like, there is a chance to win this out, and when it wins, we're all going to be okay. Here, it really just feels like, fuck you and your DC universe. Which I know that's not the case because James Tynion loves DC Comics, so I'm very aware that's not what he's trying to do. But it really does feel like, if it was Garth Ennis, I'd have been, if it was someone like Garth Ennis or someone else, I'd been like, yeah, that tracks. But like here, I understand he's trying to go for full horror, not a lot of hope, but that's just not me. Like, that's just I was like, we just did this before, but with zombies, and it was done better. That's what I'm trying to say, is that, like, we already got an undead universe encountering the DC universe, and it was done much better. So I don't feel like doing it again. It's like exhaustion. Like, you were doing the same thing over, just with a different monster. Fuck that noise. So yeah, do I recommend DC versus Vampires? Not really. I didn't care for it. Did not care for it at all, and I do apologize for Chris, but he always says, like, be, truthful in your review, so that's what I plan to do. So yeah, there's my recommendation for DC vs. Vampires. Firstly, I didn't like it. I know it got a cult following, so if you do like it, that's totally fine. I personally just did not give two shits about this book by the end of it, and I have no intention of reading the rest of the universe. But if you want to, go right ahead. Anyway, so you guys tell me in the comments below, what did you guys think of DC versus Vampires? Did you guys like it, hate it? Comment below, let me know. Other than that, hope you all enjoyed this. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time, the Multiverse.